The building stood like a confession against the cliffs. Rowan Blackwood arrived on a Thursday when the fog was thick enough to erase the horizon. He'd purchased the hospice sight unseen, another property in a portfolio of acquisitions, another structure to be dismantled and repurposed. Progress, his lawyers called it. Inevitable, said the city planners. He called it business. The drive from the city had taken 4 hours, but it felt like crossing into another lifetime. The coastal town hadn't changed. The same gray stone harbor, the same fishing boats listing in shallow water like broken promises, the same salt-thick air that once tasted like freedom. 23 years since he'd left. 23 years since he'd believed that leaving was the same as moving forward. The hospice waited at the end of a narrow road that twisted along the cliffs. Victorian bones, weathered white paint, windows like tired eyes. It had been abandoned for a decade, deemed structurally unsound. Rowan had already hired the demolition crew. They'd arrive in 2 weeks. He parked and stood in the wind, watching seabirds circle the dying structure. Somewhere inside his chest, something shifted, a sensation he'd spent 2 decades learning to ignore. The door opened before he could knock, and there she was. Time performs strange surgery. It carves away softness, reveals architecture underneath. Ilara Vale stood in the doorway wearing paint-stained jeans and a sweater the color of storm clouds, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands marked with the kind of scars that come from living fully. She was 43 now. She was more beautiful than memory had allowed. Rowan. His name in her mouth after all these years, it landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through everything he thought he'd buried. Ilara. His voice came out steadier than his pulse. I didn't know you were here. I work here, she said. There was no warmth in her tone, but no coldness either. Just fact. I'm the hospice coordinator. The building's been abandoned for 10 years, I know. She stepped aside, a gesture more habitual than welcoming. We reopened it 3 months ago. Small operation, 4 beds, volunteer staff. Rowan felt the contract weight heavy in his briefcase, the demolition orders, the architectural plans for the luxury resort that would replace this crumbling monument to dying. I need to speak with whoever's in charge. That would be me. Their eyes met properly for the first time. Hers were still that impossible shade of green. Sea glass, he'd called them once, back when poetry felt natural between them. But there was something new in them now, a depth that comes from witnessing, from holding hands as strangers take their final breaths. Then we need to talk. They sat in the hospice kitchen while rain began its slow assault on the windows. Ilara made tea with the precision of someone who'd learned to find meditation in small rituals. Rowan watched her hands move, the same hands that once knew every scar on his body, that had traced his face in darkness, that had packed a single suitcase and vanished without explanation. The building's condemned, he said. The foundation's compromised. It's not safe. We had it assessed. It's stable for another 2 years, maybe 3. My engineers disagree. Your engineers want to build a resort. It wasn't an accusation. Worse, it was understanding. She'd always been able to see through the armor of his words to the soft machinery underneath. This is business, Ilara. Everything was business with you, Rowan. Even us, eventually. There it was. The first real acknowledgement of the history that hung between them like smoke. That's not fair. No, she agreed quietly. It's not, but it's true. He wanted to argue, wanted to defend the man he'd become, successful, powerful, untouchable, but that man felt thin and unconvincing in her presence, like a suit that no longer fit. Why are you here? He asked instead. Of all places, this town, this building. Ilara's fingers tightened around her mug. For a moment he thought she might answer. Then footsteps sounded from upstairs, slow, careful, the rhythm of someone for whom each step is a negotiation with pain. I need to check on a patient, she said, standing. You can stay if you want. Look around. See what you're planning to destroy. She left him alone with his tea and the ghosts. 23 years ago, summer. They'd met at the harbor, both 19 and convinced they understood the shape of their futures. Rowan was working construction to pay for business school, his hands already learning the language of building and breaking. Alara was painting, always painting, trying to capture the way light fell through fog. "You can't hold on to light," he told her, watching her work on the pier. "No," she agreed, not looking up at her canvas, "but you can remember how it felt." He'd fallen in love with her incrementally, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how she laughed with her whole body, the fierce, aching tenderness with which she approached the world. She painted like someone trying to prove that beauty was evidence of meaning. He built like someone trying to prove he mattered. They were young enough to believe love was simple. They were wrong. Present day. Rowan walked through the hospice like a man touring a museum of his own discarded life. The building was shabby but clean. Bright blankets covered worn furniture. Paintings, Alara's work, he recognized her style, hung in every room. Landscapes mostly, the sea in its infinite moods, light breaking through storm clouds. Evidence of hope in a place designed for endings. In the common room, he found an elderly man asleep in a chair by the window, oxygen tubes like delicate roots connecting him to the machinery of temporary survival. The man's face was peaceful. Someone, Alara probably, had placed a folded quilt over his legs. "That's Thomas," Rowan turned. A young woman in scrubs stood in the doorway, her smile gentle but appraising. "I'm Maya. I volunteer here on weekends." She moved to check Thomas's oxygen levels. "Alara told me we have a visitor. I'm here about the building." "Right, the demolition." Maya adjusted Thomas's blanket with the casual intimacy of someone accustomed to caring for the dying. "He has maybe 3 weeks. Pancreatic cancer. His family lives overseas. Can't afford to fly back." The implication landed like an accusation. "You want to take away his last refuge." "I'm sorry," Rowan said, and meant it. "Are you?" Maya met his eyes. "Or are you just sorry it's complicated?" Before he could answer, Thomas stirred, his eyes opening slowly. He looked at Rowan with the peculiar clarity that sometimes comes near the end, as if dying stripped away the obligation to pretend. "You're the one," Thomas said, his voice paper thin. Thomas started, but the old man raised a trembling hand. 23 years, he continued. "That's a long time to carry something." Rowan felt his chest constrict. "I don't know what you mean." "Liar." But Thomas smiled as he said it. "We're all liars here. It's the one thing dying people and cowards have in common."
The rain intensified as evening fell. Rowan should have driven back to the city, should have called his lawyers, initiated the legal process to vacate the building, should have done what he always did, prioritize the future over the past. Instead, he stayed. Alara found him on the covered porch, watching lightning illuminate the sea. "You should go," she said. "The roads will flood." "Let them." She leaned against the railing beside him, careful to maintain distance. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd once known every frequency of each other's silence. "Why did you leave?" The question escaped before he could stop it. 23 years of wondering, and he'd never found the courage to ask directly. Alara didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely audible over the rain. "Do you remember the night before I left? What you said to me?" He did. God help him, he remembered every word. "I'm going to New York." The firm made an offer. "This is what I've been working for, Alara. This is the plan. You can come with me, or we can figure something out. Long distance, maybe. And if I can't leave, then you're choosing this place over us, over our future. There are different kinds of futures, Rowan. Not for me." Standing on the porch in the rain, Rowan felt the weight of his younger self's certainty like stones in his pockets. "I thought I was choosing ambition," he said quietly. "I thought I was choosing success." "You were choosing safety," Alara corrected. "Love is terrifying. It requires you to be vulnerable, to let someone see you completely. You were brilliant and driven and so scared of needing anyone. And you? I was scared too, but of different things." Thunder rolled across the water. In its echo, Rowan heard the question he'd been avoiding. "What were you scared of?" Alara turned to face him fully. In the lightning's brief illumination, he saw her eyes shining, not with tears, but with something harder, something earned. "Of telling you the truth. Of watching you stay out of obligation instead of love." "What truth?" She held his gaze. "That I was pregnant." The world tilted. "You were..." His voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have stayed. Not because you wanted to, but because it was the right thing. The honorable thing.
And I loved you too much to let you resent me for the life you didn't choose. She wrapped her arms around herself. I loved you enough to let you go. Where? He couldn't finish. Couldn't form the question around the sudden understanding of all he'd lost. I miscarried, 6 weeks after I left. Her voice remained steady, but he heard the old grief underneath. I was alone in a hospital in Portland. No family, no friends. Just alone. Rowan reached for her instinctively, but she stepped back. Don't. I didn't tell you this for comfort. I told you because you asked why I left. Because you deserve to know that some of us measure our lives by what we were willing to sacrifice, not what we were able to build. Alara. I came back here 2 years later, started painting again, eventually found my way to hospice care. Do you know why? She didn't wait for an answer. Because I understood something about endings, about how we help each other through the hardest transitions, about how love isn't always meant to be kept. Sometimes it's just meant to teach us how to open our hands. The rain fell between them like years. Rowan stayed in town, told his assistant he needed a week to finalize the property assessment, told himself he was being thorough, professional, told himself anything except the truth, that leaving felt like dying. He spent his days at the hospice, ostensibly reviewing structural reports, but really he was watching Alara work. She moved through the building like water, essential, patient, present. She sat with Thomas during his worst pain episodes, reading him poetry in a low voice. She helped Maya change bedding, in the room where an elderly woman named Ruth lay dying of emphysema, her breath a constant whistle of struggle. She painted with a young man named David who had weeks, maybe days left to ALS, their canvases side by side, 2 people racing against time to create something beautiful. Why do you do this? Rowan asked her one afternoon. They were in the garden, a small plot Alara had cultivated with herbs and wildflowers, life blooming in the shadow of death. Because someone needs to, she said simply. Because when my mother was dying, a hospice nurse held her hand and told her it was okay to go. Because being present for someone's ending is sacred work. Because, she paused, pulling a weed with careful deliberation. Because I needed to learn how to stay. The words landed like an indictment and an invocation at once. I'm sorry, Rowan said, for all of it, for not seeing you, for making you choose between your truth and my ambition, for... Stop. Alara sat back on her heels. I don't need your apology, Rowan. I needed it 23 years ago. Now I just need you to understand something. She stood, dirt on her knees, the afternoon light hatching the silver in her hair. You can't demolish this building. Not yet. Not while people are still living and dying here. Not while we're still doing this work. The contract. Fuck the contract. The profanity sounded strange in her mouth, evidence of real anger. You built an empire, Rowan. You have more money than you'll ever spend. You can afford to wait. The question is, will you? It wasn't really a question about the building. They both knew it.
Ruth died on a Tuesday morning, while rain drummed against the windows. Rowan was there when it happened, had been sitting in the common room when he heard the change in her breathing, that distinctive rattle that signals the body's final negotiations with itself. Alara moved quickly, but without panic, Maya close behind. They bracketed Ruth's bed like sentinels, each holding one of her hands. They didn't speak, didn't offer empty reassurances, just stayed, just witness. Rowan stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder on something holy. Ruth's breathing slowed, paused, continued, paused longer. The space between breaths expanded until it became infinite. Then silence. Alara closed Ruth's eyes with fingers gentle as prayer. She and Maya sat with the body for a full hour afterward, their stillness a form of honor. Rowan watched, understanding for the first time what Alara had meant about sacred work. This was love stripped of romance, love as service, love as bearing witness to another person's most vulnerable moments and saying, you are not alone, you matter, your ending matters. Later, after Ruth's body had been collected and the room cleaned and blessed with sage, Alara's ritual, performed with quiet reverence, Rowan found himself alone with her in the kitchen. How do you do this? He asked. How do you watch people die and not break? Who says I don't break? Alara poured them both whiskey, neat. I break all the time. Then I put myself back together and do it again. That's the work. It seems unbearable. Most important things are. She met his eyes. You know that. You just directed all your capacity for bearing unbearable things toward building instead of connecting. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you were exactly who you needed to be. Maybe we both were. She sipped her whiskey. The question isn't whether our past selves made mistakes. Of course they did. The question is whether our present selves are brave enough to make different choices. What choice do you want me to make, Ilara? She set down her glass. I want you to delay the demolition. Give us a year. That's all I'm asking. 1 year to transition our patients, to find alternative funding, to close with dignity instead of being forcibly scattered. And then? And then you can build your resort. Turn this place into luxury suites for people who've never had to think about mortality. Do what you came here to do. There was no judgment in her voice, just sadness, and something that might have been acceptance. What if I don't want to build the resort? The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. Ilara studied his face. Then you need to figure out what you do want, and fast. Because time, Rowan, time doesn't wait for our epiphanies. 22 years ago, autumn. Ilara stood in the hospital bathroom in Portland, staring at the bled. The doctor's words echoed. Sometimes these things just happen. It's not your fault. Your body knew something wasn't right. But her body felt like a traitor. Her body had made a choice without consulting her heart. She thought about calling Rowan, picked up her phone 17 times, put it down 17 times. What would she say? Remember the pregnancy I never told you about? Well, you're free now. The problem solved itself. No. She couldn't make him complicit in her grief, couldn't let him carry guilt for a loss he'd never known he'd faced. This pain was hers. She would carry it alone. She painted through the miscarriage's aftermath, painted grief as waves against stones, painted absence as negative space and light, painted the ghost of the child that never was as a horizon that never quite came into focus. And slowly, over months and years, she learned something about love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is carry your pain privately, not as martyrdom, but as gift. Let them keep the version of the story where they're the hero of their own life. Let them believe they made the brave choice, the hard choice, the necessary choice. Let them be free, even if it destroys you. Present day. Thomas died 3 days after Ruth. His family had managed to video call, had said their goodbyes through pixelated screens. He'd gone peacefully, Ilara holding his hand while he told her about his late wife, about the cherry tree they'd planted in their garden 40 years ago, about the way morning light used to catch in her gray hair. She was beautiful, he whispered near the end, not despite the years, because of them. His last words were, "Don't wait." Rowan helped Ilara clean Thomas's room afterward. They worked in silence, stripping sheets, wiping surfaces, preparing the space for the next person who would need it. The intimacy of the task, its ordinariness made sacred by context, felt like its own form of conversation. "I've been thinking," Rowan said finally, "about what you said, about time not waiting." Ilara paused, unfolding a blanket. And I've spent 23 years building things that don't matter, structures that will outlast me but won't remember me, won't carry my care, won't hold any trace of who I actually was. Rowan, let me finish. He set down the sheets. I came here planning to demolish this building, to replace it with something profitable, something that would make sense on a balance sheet. That's what you do. It's what I've done, past tense. He turned to face her fully. I'm selling the property to a nonprofit trust, with the stipulation that the hospice remains operational for as long as the building is structurally sound. When it finally needs to come down, the trust will have funds to build a new facility, a real one, permanent. Ilara's hands stilled on the blanket. Why? Because Thomas was right. We're all liars, dying people and cowards, and I'm tired of being a coward. This doesn't change anything between us, she said quietly. You know that, right? This doesn't erase 23 years, doesn't undo the choices we made. I know. Then why? Because you taught me something. All those years ago when you left. He crossed the space between them, close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. You taught me that love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means having the courage to open your hands. Ilara's breath caught. Rowan, I'm not asking for us to go back. I'm not asking for a second chance or a happy ending or any of the things people say when they're trying to reclaim what time took from them. His voice was steady, clear. I'm just asking to stay, to learn this work from you, to figure out how to build something that matters. You don't know what you're asking. This work, it will break you. Then let it break me. I've spent 2 decades being unbreakable. I'm tired, Ilara. I'm so tired of being the person who leaves. She studied his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Not a romantic gesture, a clinical one, a hospice worker's assessment. Your heart's racing, she observed. I know. Are you scared?
Terrified. Good. She let her hand drop. Fear means you understand the stakes. Fear means you're finally paying attention.
David died on a Sunday morning while spring light poured through the windows. He'd been painting until the previous evening, his canvas a riot of color, abstract shapes that suggested joy without depicting it. Ilara had helped him hold the brush toward the end, guiding his weakened hands. Rowan sat with him during the final hours. They didn't talk much. David had lost most of his speech to the disease, could communicate only through eye movements and the occasional labored word. But in the silence, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended language. This is what it means to be human. To know we're dying and create anyway. To love people we'll have to leave. To paint light even as darkness gathers. When David's breathing changed, Rowan called for Ilara. She came immediately, bringing her calm, her presence, her absolute attention. Together they sat vigil. David's last conscious moment was spent looking at his painting. His eyes moved across the canvas with what Rowan recognized as satisfaction, maybe even pride. I made something, those eyes said. I mattered. Then he closed them. Tell me when, Ilara whispered to Rowan. Tell me when you feel it. Feel what? The moment he goes, you'll know. And he did. There was a shift in the room's atmosphere. Not dramatic, not supernatural, just a subtle change in pressure, like a door closing softly in another part of a house. One moment David was there, struggling. The next, only his body remained. The absence of a person is its own presence. Afterward, while Maya handled the necessary phone calls, Ilara and Rowan stood in the garden. Sunlight made the ordinary world almost unbearably beautiful. The herbs growing wild, the sound of waves against cliffs, the salt-thick air that had always tasted like homecoming. How many? Rowan asked. How many what? How many people have you watched die? Ilara considered. 43. Not counting my mother. Not counting the child I lost. The number landed heavy. 43 lives witnessed through their endings. 43 families helped through their artist moment. 43 sacred passings held with attention and care. How do you carry it? The same way you carry anything unbearable, she said. One breath at a time. One moment of presence at a time. You don't carry the whole weight at once. You just stay present for what's in front of you. Is that what you've been doing all these years? Just staying present? Mostly, she bent to pull a weed, her movements automatic. Though, if I'm honest, I've also been waiting. His heart stuttered. For what? For you to come back. For you to finally understand that life isn't measured by what you build, but by how you show up. For you to stop running from the parts of yourself that need other people. She straightened, dirt on her hands. For you to realize that strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about being willing to touch and be touched, even knowing how much it will hurt when you inevitably lose. And now that I'm here, now I have to decide if I'm brave enough to risk it again, to let you in, to trust that this time you'll stay when things get hard. I will. You can't promise that, Rowan. None of us can. Thomas thought he'd have another year. Ruth thought she'd see her granddaughter's graduation. David thought he'd finish his series of paintings. We're all just guessing. All just hoping we have more time than we actually get. Then let's not waste it. She shook her head, but gently. It's not that simple. I've built a life here. I've learned to be content in my solitude. I've made peace with what we were and what we couldn't be. You showing up, making grand gestures with the building, it doesn't undo 23 years of choosing different paths. I'm not trying to undo anything. I'm trying to... What? Fix it? There's nothing broken, Rowan. We're just two people who loved each other once and made different choices. That's not a tragedy. That's just life. But her voice wavered on the last word, and in that waver, he heard everything she wasn't saying.
They fell into a routine. Rowan stayed in town, rented a small cottage by the harbor, learned the rhythms of hospice work. He wasn't a natural, too stiff at first, too uncomfortable with silence, too afraid of doing the wrong thing. But Ilara was patient, teaching him the small intimacies of care, how to help someone sit up without causing pain, how to listen without trying to fix, how to be present without taking up too much space. He learned to read the signs, the way someone's breathing changed when pain medication started working, the particular quality of restlessness that meant the end was near, the importance of small comforts, a favorite blanket, a window open to catch the sea breeze, photographs arranged just so. They had 3 more patients cycle through in the following months. Each death was different.
Each mattered in its own way. And through it all, he and Alara circled each other like binary stars, close enough to feel each other's gravity, never quite touching. Until one night, after a particularly difficult death, they sat on the porch watching a storm roll in from the sea. "I can't do this," Alara said suddenly. Rowan's stomach dropped. "Can't do what?" "This dance, this careful distance we maintain, this pretending that having you here doesn't undo all the peace I worked so hard to build." "Then stop pretending. It's not that easy." "Why not?" She turned to him, her face raw with the kind of honesty that comes from exhaustion. "Because I spent 23 years learning to live without you, learning to be whole on my own, learning that I didn't need you to be complete. And now you're here, and you're trying, and you're staying, and every time I look at you, I feel myself wanting things I'd convinced myself I didn't need anymore." "What things?" "Partnership, companionship, someone to share the hard moments with, someone who understands why I do this work and doesn't try to save me from it." Her voice cracked. "Someone who knows all my scars and loves me anyway, not despite them, because of them, because they're proof I survived." Rowan reached for her hand. She let him take it. "You're right," he said. "We can't go back, can't reclaim what we lost, can't pretend the intervening years didn't happen." "Then what are we doing?" "Learning each other again. Not who we were, but who we are. Starting from where we are, not where we wish we'd been. And if it doesn't work, if we discover we're too different now, if the people we've become don't fit together anymore, then at least we'll know. At least we tried. At least we didn't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." Alara was quiet for a long time, watching lightning illuminate the sea. When she spoke again, her voice was small, vulnerable in a way he'd never heard. "I'm afraid, Rowan. I'm afraid of how much I still love you. I'm afraid it never stopped. I'm afraid I'm the fool who's been waiting all this time for something that was never going to come back." He pulled her close. She resisted for half a second, then folded into him. She fit against his chest the way she always had, like she'd been carved from the empty space his body maintained just for her. "You're not a fool," he whispered into her hair. "And I did come back, maybe 23 years late, maybe broken and humbled and finally ready to stop running. But I came back." She pressed her face against his shoulder, and he felt the dampness of her tears through his shirt. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Don't promise me forever. Don't promise me happy endings. Just promise me honesty. Promise me presence. Promise me that when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't disappear, that you'll fight through it with me instead of running. I promise." "You say that now. I mean it now. That's all any of us have. This moment. This choice. I can't guarantee tomorrow, but today, right now, I'm choosing to stay. I'll choose it again tomorrow, and the day after, and I'll keep choosing it until either you ask me to leave or my body gives out." He pulled back enough to see her face. "Alara, I wasted 23 years building monuments to my own ego. I'm not wasting whatever time I have left." She searched his eyes, looking for certainty in a fundamentally uncertain world. Then she kissed him. It wasn't the kiss of their youth, passionate, desperate, searching. This kiss was something else entirely, a recognition, a reunion, a gentle acknowledgement that they'd both survived the long journey back to each other and arrived changed. It tasted like salt and tears and the particular grief of knowing that time doesn't reverse, only moves forward. It felt like forgiveness.
6 months later, autumn painted the coast in shades of amber and rust. The hospice had become Rowan's world. He'd learned to change bedpans without flinching, to read poetry and steady voices while patients slipped away, to hold space for family members who needed someone to rage at or weep with. He'd also learned something about himself, that his capacity for building could extend beyond structures, that he could construct containers for grief, scaffolding for loss, architecture for healing. He and Alara had settled into something that wasn't quite what they'd been, and wasn't quite something new. They were partners in the work. They were careful with each other. They were learning trust like a language they'd once spoken fluently, but had to study all over again. Some nights they slept in the same bed. Other nights they needed solitude. Both felt like forms of intimacy. One evening, after helping a woman named Margaret through her final hours, they sat in the garden as dusk settled over the cliffs. Margaret had died angry, raging against the unfairness of a life cut short, refusing comfort, refusing peace.
It had been exhausting and heartbreaking and necessary. I used to think there was a right way to die, Alara said. A good death versus a bad death. Peaceful versus difficult. And now? Now I think there's just death. It's what it is. Some people go quietly. Some go fighting. Neither is better. Both are valid. The dying get to decide how they meet it. Margaret was so angry. She earned that anger. 63 years old. Cancer diagnosis 6 months ago. She did everything right. Ate well, exercised, never smoked. And still, Alara shrugged. Life doesn't care about our virtue. Disease doesn't care about our good behavior. That's a hard truth. How do you make peace with it? With the randomness? I don't. I just try to honor it. Try to let people die as themselves, not as some sanitized version we're more comfortable with. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then Alara spoke again, her voice careful. I need to tell you something. Rowan's chest tightened. Okay. I had a scan last month. Routine. Or supposed to be routine. She wouldn't look at him. They found something. In my breast. Small, but there. Biopsy came back positive. The world tilted. Alara, it's early stage. Very treatable. I'm scheduled for surgery next month. Then radiation probably. Maybe chemo, depending on what they find. Now she did look at him. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. I'm not telling you so you'll stay out of obligation. I'm telling you because if we're doing this, really doing this, you need to know all of it. The scars I have and the ones I might be getting. Rowan's throat was tight. Do you think I'd leave? I think it would be understandable if you did. I think watching someone you love face mortality is different from helping strangers through it. I think... Stop. He took her hands, holding tight. 23 years ago, I ran when things got real. When love required me to be vulnerable. To need someone. To face uncertainty. His voice was steady, certain. I'm not that person anymore. You helped me not that person anymore. Rowan, I'm not leaving. Not for this. Not for anything. You want to know why I really came back? Why I really stayed? He pressed her hands against his chest, letting her feel his heartbeat. Rapid, strong, alive. Because I finally understood what you tried to tell me.